no, it turned to German in the chat there. Yeah. Like, oh no.
What is up with the German?
I tried to learn German. It was awful. I thought that my German heritage would sort of automatically provide me some ancestral memory to source to use the to learn the language. But what I realized is that when you're in your mid-30s, your brain is done.
Oh man. Yeah.
That was a while back.
We are 5x5. Yeah. Thanks, one dog geek. Yeah.
Nice. You can talk now, RH. We're not
Oh no, I was just making sure I'm not making any extra noise in the background. We're all good.
Yeah. Yeah. This is where we go live. I usually, finish a story that is a little awkward to have, on live YouTube, and then we go into the show.
This is our usual non sequitur period, but we can just get right into it.
Yeah. Hang on a second for that upload to finish here.
Oh, you still got to upload them?
It is, but I just figured we'll wait 10 seconds.
I got you. Okay.
Don't have to worry about that. Yeah.
Well.
All right.
We ready?
Yep.
Welcome to the Midlife Pilot Podcast. We are glad you're with us. What is it like to become a pilot in your 40s and 50s? The challenges are unique for those of us in midlife, but so are the rewards. Hosts Ben, Brian, and Ted talk learning to fly, growing as pilots, and the joy of flying to destinations. The purpose of the podcast is not to teach, but to share knowledge and experiences of being a midlife pilot. Join the Midlife Pilot community and listen in every week. We are not CFIs or particularly intelligent, so if you want to learn how to fly, talk to anyone else other than the hosts of a podcast. Even this intro was too challenging for us, and we used a robot to do it. Okay, checklists are complete. Let's get the show started.
Hello, and welcome to episode 84 of the Midlife Pilot Podcast, where we talk all things flying and aviation in midlife. My name is Ben. I am a pilot with a commercial certificate flying in the Atlanta metropolitan area. I fly an airplane called the Beast, Cessna 182. And with me tonight, as always, is my friend Brian, a private pilot in Nashville, which is the home of the Bachelorette Super Charlie. He flies a Cherokee 180 named Lucy. Good evening, sir.
Good evening. And by the way, it might become the Haktua Super Charlie, but I think we're just going to leave it Bachelorette for now.
Yes.
Very nice. And also joining us from the West Coast, our friend Ted, a sport pilot living in the Portland area, flying a flight design CTLS, also under the call sign of the Pipeline. We call it the Egg. Ted, how you doing, sir?
Hey, doing well. Yeah, Pipeline Egg. That's what I should call myself on air.
That. Yeah. And also joining us tonight, we have a special guest, our friend who is a former controller and now a pilot at Penguin Airlines. And if you're maybe one of the 5 people interested in aviation in the world that hasn't heard of Opposing Bases, Romeo Hotel is one of the co-hosts of that amazing podcast. And we're glad you're with us. How you doing, sir?
Great, Ben. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
Excited to be here. Talk to your pilot group in the audience. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you again.
Absolutely. You just got back from a fun trip.
I did. I just got back from another trip to Europe. I went to Portugal for the first time. Yeah.
I'm fantasizing about the trip down to Peach State Aerodrome in Zebulon, Georgia, and you're talking about going to Portugal. That's the difference in our lives right now.
It's a lot of fun. I'm having a great time.
It's awesome.
And you told us that you're picking up new airports. Like that's kind of your goal is go to new places when you're.
Yeah. So the fleet I'm on has a wide array of airports to choose from, and if a trip comes up that I feel like I can get, I'm going to put my name in for it. And so far it's worked out. I've probably been to 10 different places in 4 or 5 months, and it's awesome.
Even people with pretty good geography knowledge, you're going to just, if you look at a list of places that are just faraway places, you're going to pretty quickly get to something that you're just like, I don't even know what that place really is. Have you just picked a place yet where you're like, you just think, I don't even know what this is. I should go there.
Well, usually the list for what I can get with my seniority is pretty short. The list is small for what I can get the next day. But I haven't run across but a couple that I had to actually go look up. Like, I don't even know where that airport. I don't even know what country that's in.
Yeah.
First, what's the identifier? Where is that? But it's an awesome fleet. I can do domestic stuff. I can do Europe and see something new every week, basically.
There's a lot of continents and a lot of places.
Yes.
You're typed on the 7576. Which of them do you fly?
Actually both. And if
Okay.
I don't have my logbook up to date, and I haven't looked at the numbers in a little bit, but they were even up until about 250 hours, and they're
Okay.
pretty close. This was the first trip I took the 75 across the second trip of the 757 going across the Atlantic. Mostly that's for domestic, but there are some shorter European flights we'll do in that. The majority of the European stuff is done by the 767 on my fleet. So, but we'll fly both. I bet you it's close to 50-50 in my logbook so far.
Well, this is great. This is just me asking RH the questions that I wanted to know. So, I think we have a podcast going on, but I don't. This is great.
Well, I want to hear what exotic places you've flown to, Ted, and Brian, for that matter. For me, it's Middle Georgia.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've been to some places. We've been to some places.
Yeah, we have been.
And a lot of times it's like the way we have to do it here, Ben, in the South, is you have to go to places that pretend that they are more exotic places. Like going to Coleman, Alabama, right? You go to Coleman, it's kind of a no place, but if you go into town and you go to the monastery and then you take a tour of the big acreage in the back of it, a monk made miniatures of every place in the world that you can just walk through. So it's kind of like being in Italy, and then, so you get an exotic experience just by going to the middle of nowhere, Alabama, the right way.
Yeah,
I'll say my destinations are really based at this time of year on when I can be at 8,000 feet for at least 30 to 45 minutes to get away from this heat. And I'm not sure I really care where the destination is, as long as I can climb to 8,000 and stay there for a little while. And I agree with you. I do like the smaller places and seeing a lot of the places around here. So, and Ted, you live in an Ansel Adams photo, so
I know.
I don't really feel too bad for you. So,
yeah, it's all just kind of amazing. So, yeah.
Well, let's tackle a couple of the housekeeping items, or all of the housekeeping items for that matter. So if you don't know and you're listening to this on the audio version of this, we broadcast live on YouTube, usually every Tuesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern. We have a very active chat room. The live chat is open for questions and comments, even comments on my 1980s style shirt, which one day I'll geek, I'll remember that.
I like it.
However, it is a primarily audio, so please make sure that you subscribe or follow using your favorite app. You can find links to our contact info, become a Patreon supporter, and everything at our website at midlifepilotpodcast.com. So please look us up. So with that, tonight's subject, and the reason that we invited RH to join us, is the topic is radio for noobs. This is a topic that I think applies to the 50-hour pilot as well as the 1,000-hour pilot, because if I recorded all of mine, I think I could fill up an audio library of my screw-ups, as we all do. I don't think it really matters, but we wanted to kind of tackle this. One of the things that we wanted to bring RH in on is, we hear a lot on, and for those that don't know, RH is on the one of the most popular aviation podcasts out there, Opposing Basis. If you're not listening to it, you are only doing yourself a disservice. But we hear a lot reading the room, which is not necessarily an easy thing to do when you come on to frequency. Trying to follow proper etiquette, proper phraseology, and all that. And it can be very daunting to new pilots.
Well, I think also there's a tendency, there's phases to the learning the radios, because you're in training, you're just trying to survive. then you get out there and you're still doing a little bit of surviving, but you're comfortable enough to do the things that you're used to doing and the calls that you're used to making and the responses that you're used to getting. And your kind of comfort zone is a little small, but it's there. And you might be hesitant. The one thing I appreciate about what you guys do so much on Opposing Bases is really always reinforcing the idea that you shouldn't be afraid to ask for clarification or to speak up, and to not be bowing down in sort of an automatic complicity all the time. And that's part of becoming a pilot in command is, elevating yourself to that place. But it's hard when it's kind of like you going to Portugal. It's like, I don't really know the language, but, but I kind of know enough to get around, so I feel like what's unique about this audience is whether this is the recent past for us or people that are right in the middle of it. I think what we're really touching on is that the nuances that are a little bit between the early training pieces of communications and, the maybe deep dives that you guys often delve into, procedures and, the minutia of certain problem situations. We're in that spot where it's like, okay, how do you check in without being a problem? And you're so used to I'm just trying to press the button and do the things, right? So we were talking about reading the room. Ted, do you feel like you have learned to read the room?
A little bit, I was so bad on the radio at first, and I think that I'm just passable now. And I always think it's hilarious that I'm on a podcast because I don't think I'm good with words, and and I feel that way on the radio too. So, part of the advantage of listening to OB because of that. I had written down one thing that RH said recently is, when you're handed off, they're not expecting you to check in within 5 seconds.
Yeah.
There isn't it isn't a race when you switch frequencies. Even if the frequency is clear, you don't have to check, take your time. And that's been just little things like that have been handy. But
Ben,
RH, tell us. Yeah.
Well, I want to ask RH something, and it's through listening to their podcast, and it's also 1,045 hours in a Cessna 182, talking to Atlanta Approach and talking to a lot of different controllers. The first thing is, as a new pilot, whether you're learning to fly from a non-towered airport or a towered airport, you almost get the feeling that I don't want to talk to ATC because they're too busy and they don't want to they're dealing with a bunch of Delta pilots and whoever else. I'm a little old bug smasher. They don't want to talk to me. All right, can you comment on that? And it doesn't matter if it's a Charlie, Bravo, Delta airspace. Can you touch on that for us?
Well, first I'll kind of look big picture for your audience, newer pilots that are learning something new midlife. Everybody's been in the spot where they're learning this new language. It's English, but it's a different world of the way you speak and the way you conduct yourself, how you prepare for each time you hit the button. But everybody's been there, controllers included. So don't forget that. Everybody that is listening to you, what you think is the worst transmission of your life, they've all done that. Every single one of them has done that. So I think that's important to remember. When you talk about reading a room and whether or not it's a Delta or an untowered airport, a Charlie or a Bravo, this is where the read your room comes in. If you're just starting out and you're just getting your confidence level built up, don't expect that to be enhanced at a Bravo with controllers that aren't used to dealing with student pilots or low time, less than 200-hour pilots. They're not used to that. That doesn't make them incapable of handling you at certain times, but they're used to a certain cadence, a certain vocabulary, a certain set of skills that you don't have yet, and that's okay. At a Delta or Charlie, that's typically their bread and butter. That's who they're used to speaking to. So if you want to learn immerse yourself as much as possible. And I would suggest doing that by, all the things you can get online. LiveATC.net is a very good place to have it in the background, just listening, cadence, language, rhythm, all those things while you're learning what to say when you push the button. And when you practice it at a non-towered airport, it's great. It should build up your confidence for talking to a Delta controller and a Charlie the first time you get your squawk, the first time you get the whole CRAFT, the whole craft bit. I think it's something to just rewind and pause. Everybody, including the controllers, has been in that spot where they feel, I'm stupid. I'm going to say the wrong thing. What do I say? I'm going to say, I'm going to screw something up, and they're scared to hit it, but you have to. Don't be afraid to reach out. Don't be afraid to ask for flight following. I think that's what you're getting at, Ben, is the controllers do want to talk to you. You do not have to be perfect, and you can enjoy it while it's happening. Don't get too wrapped around the axle about being perfect on the radio, because if you listen to enough of it online or go to enough places, you realize the controllers are not perfect either.
And from a controlling perspective, you would rather be talking to that plane in your area than not talking to them, because you're going to know what their intentions are.
I think that might be one of the things that people learn after 40, 50 episodes of listening to our show. It's not the lip service. The controllers do want to talk to you, and we've never talked to another controller. Busy Class Charlies, busy Deltas, busy Bravos, centers. Not one of them has said, we don't want to talk to that VFR 1200 code. They do. You're in a place that you may not realize is somehow in the way of something else, a procedure or another airplane, and they do want to talk to you. They might not be able to all the time, but I think we're doing our part in getting rid of that myth that ATC doesn't want to talk to you because you're doing 100 knots at 3,500 feet. That's simply not true.
It took me a lot of hours to realize it, but once you are on flight following enough, you realize what those advantages are when they have you stop a climb or stop a descent, because they're going to turn a 737 underneath you as they're climbing out, and they don't want to worry about you. Or when you've got the other Cessna that's oncoming, but they're talking to them, so they know they can put you close. And those, that's the thing I really notice, is how wide of a berth you have to give somebody that's not talking versus that.
One of the things that I struggle with sometimes, at least in this airspace, and I wouldn't say it's a radio fear or anything, but it is sort of a thing that creates hesitation sometimes, is I haven't been able to find a consistent approach for how you just VFR flying. You have an assigned altitude, and you need to start getting down, and you don't want to ask, so sometimes they will slam dunk you into John Tune from 6,000 feet, no problem. Luckily I fly a Cherokee, so it's just kind of fun. It's not a problem. But unless there's passengers, but there's just little nuances in the communication sometimes where as much as I feel even emboldened to sort of ask for what I want or what I need, the busier the airspace, the more I find myself shrinking in the mind of just complicity and just doing what I'm told. But this has amounted to a lot of problems for me early on, not being, you guys have talked about this a lot on your podcast, being able to be aware of where you are in relation to departure corridors and arrival corridors, and understanding that, yes, they want to talk to you, because you can't just be skimming around the Charlie. You could be in the worst possible place ever. And it's really hard for people like us who don't have awareness of how airline traffic work and how those planes, what altitudes are they climbing? How fast are they climbing? Or how fast are they descending? It seems like to us, geez, I'm 12 miles away from the airport. So clearly whatever's going to be happening I'm not going to be a factor here, but you actually can be directly in the way. How would you, I don't know, what would you say maybe RH about just how best to, it's sort of a twofold question. How best to sort of embrace your agency as a pilot, even when you feel like you're not, kind of maybe you're outsized by the environment. And then secondly, with respect to those things that can put you in a bad position, it's always good to be talking so that they can tell you that you're in a bad position. That's better. That humiliation is fine. It's better than dying. But how would you say is the best way for people like us to understand how those departure and arrival corridors work, and to understand where we are in space, even outside of the mandatory Class C communications or those types of spaces?
Yeah, good question. Situational awareness takes a lot of time, and it's not going to happen in your first 5 flights. And you're just getting the grasp of all the buttons and knobs that you're responsible for in your plane. To ask a low time pilot, and everybody has their own definition of that, to have that awareness of what's happening on the air traffic side, that's kind of crazy talk. So the controllers don't necessarily expect you to have that full picture. That's why you're talking to them, right? So if you realize that your plane is in a situation that, hey, you're a little bit high, for example, that's the example you brought up, request lower when able. There's the controller's turn to tell you why and when they can descend you. Why I can't do it now because of this, or all right, I'll have lower in a couple miles, which is a typical response, because they are waiting for a certain part on the scope that you don't need to necessarily be able to draw that picture. Worry about your plane, but don't be afraid to speak up. I think that's the point I want to make. If you engage in the conversation with air traffic, it doesn't mean that you have to remain silent after you've established that relationship. You can speak. There's a time and a place for everything. And Ben, thank you. You've said it, and we've said it 1,000 times on the show. Read the room. When it's really busy and you're going to a place that maybe isn't the most popular destination in the airspace, they might not know what that puzzle looks like. They don't see you as high. And don't be afraid to remind them, hey, we'll take lower when able, or have the airport in sight, whatever, if you're on an instrument flight plan. Don't be afraid to speak up. Don't hold the button down for 5 minutes. Tell them about where you're going for lunch. But, be brief, but don't let their busyness put you in a situation where you think you're not allowed to talk. That's not true.
Even when center controllers are telling you, do you have when they're asking you, do you have the airfield in sight? And you're like, I'm 27 miles out. Like, you're just trying to get rid of me.
They just can't wait to get you off their scope. No, even center controllers, speak up. Don't be afraid. Now, the situation will look different on their scope, and that does create a challenge for them. Surface airports for a center controller is not an everyday occurrence for them. They're not used to working traffic in that area. So they may be checked out in that area, but that doesn't mean that it's their bread and butter. So that's even more important to speak up. Hey, I know on your scope, you're not going to say all this. I look like I'm about an inch away from this airport, but I need to do something here. Hello, I'm here. Don't be afraid. They do want to talk to you. That doesn't just mean check in once and have them give you traffic calls. That means engage in the relationship.
So speaking of reading the room, I think we have a clip that Brian has provided us that we can talk about. Ted, are you ready to play that?
116 Lima, contact Atlanta Center 133.6.
33.6, 16 Lima.
Somebody else checked on who was. So on Whiskey Golf, roger that, Atlanta altimeter 2999.
Atlanta Center, Cherokee November 5116 Lima, 4,500 climbing, 7,500.
All right, I had a couple people checked on. 827 Charlie Mike, Knoxville approach 123.9er. Knoxville 23.9er, 827 Charlie Mike. Allegiant 1432, Atlanta Center 12437. Allegiant 1432, Atlanta Center 12437. Thank you. Or 5116 Lima, you checked on?
Affirmative, 16 Lima, 4,800 climbing, 7,500.
New code for you, squawk 2543.
2543, 16 Lima.
Oh, I hope you're going to let me talk.
Oh, yeah.
You couldn't see my face. I don't know if you could see me or not. I was really liking your reaction, and your timing on that was really good. I'm not sure what the question is that's coming up, but I have a few things to say about that video. If
Go
an
for it.
instructor
Yep.
could go, I'm sorry, Ben, go ahead. I'll let you
No,
ask.
I was going to say that's what we want you to do.
Okay.
That's why we put it there.
That video has so much more in it than I think most people would realize. There's a lot going on the air traffic side that we tried to explain, and it's once you realize it's happening, it's going to make you a better pilot. That controller's talking on multiple frequencies. In your airplane is 16 Lima, right?
Mhm.
16 Lima can transmit on one at a time and listen to one or two, right? You can monitor your second radio, but pilots cannot transmit on multiple frequencies with the touch of one button. They have to go back and forth. It's one frequency at a time when you push to talk. A controller is able to speak and transmit and receive, could be 10 frequencies at a time, depending on what's combined, what sectors are open. If it's all their airspace in the middle of a midnight shift, it could be 12 frequencies. And it's hard for pilots to wrap their head around that. But when you checked in, your timing was really good. You waited till there was hey, there's nothing else happening on another frequency, which some of your pilots in this room may not realize that could be happening. I was so proud of you for waiting. You didn't do
But
the
you notice that when I flip-flopped, the first
Oh,
thing I heard was who had checked in.
Yep.
So I
And
already knew
you
that there
didn't
was
think
something amiss.
you didn't think it had to be me. Well, no, because you didn't say anything yet, so it couldn't have been you. I really like that. Then you waited a little bit, and then when you went on, despite your best efforts, you can't control that other pilots checked in on the other frequencies that you cannot hear. They're on other numbers. They're not on the same frequency. And you realize that you didn't freak out. It's not the end of the world. You're a VFR climbing at 4,500 feet, going 90 knots over the ground. Nothing bad is going to happen in this 5-10 seconds that you wait. So really good job being patient, because some pilots have to get that button pushed. I have got to check in. The world's going to end if I don't. So that was the first thing I was excited about. The second thing I was excited about was when the controller got upset that there were multiples. You didn't just take it as a cue. Fine, you waited again, and really you read the room. That's the thing I wanted to make sure I said. You read the room. You did a really good job with that. And if you didn't understand the dynamics of that, what was happening, it's important to realize that controller is hearing from multiple voices in the same headset, and they don't necessarily know what frequency they're coming from. They could look, you could see these little lights blink, but that's kind of next level stuff. They're looking at their scope, not the radio stack at the same time. So instructors have got to spend a little bit of time explaining what just happened in that 2-minute clip with pilots with minimal radio time, so they understand where they kind of fit into that. That was complex, and it looked simple, but there was a lot going on.
Yeah, I appreciate that very much. And it's definitely a thing where there's these if you really analyze that whole communication, there's sort of an early stage challenge, then a middle stage challenge, and then there's a latter stage challenge, in that you're being challenged to not have the instinct to call again, or to say, because the hardest part for that, the restraint really in that call for me was, I never knew that he heard me ever at that point, because he was saying, okay, I got a bunch of people checking in, and then he's, and then obviously then he's going on with Allegiant for, who's obviously MIA, so I can feel the blood boiling there. So I'm sort of taking that temperature while that's happening. But then, but there's just the point where he actually came back. I was actually surprised when he said, 5016 Lima, was that you checking on? But that was kind of the reward.
It was a reward, and I felt as excited as you did when it finally happened. When he came to you without you saying, "I'm here again," proves what we're trying to explain here, right? Be patient, understand where your airplane in that scenario fits in. And something we haven't talked about yet is maybe a minute before you checked in, he took that handoff. He knows you're eventually going to check in. It's not a 16 Lima. Who is that? He knows you're coming. He took that handoff from somebody, and you're on his to-do list but not the end of the world if you don't communicate the second you switch that frequency. So
He was looking for the Nordo Allegiant. It's really what he's doing.
yeah, really, really good job. You let him deal with the other stuff at the same time, and you didn't lose your mind over it. It gave you a different squawk, which confuses people too. That happens when you go from center boundary to another one more often than not, actually. Really, really good job. I'm not sure who you were flying with, if it was a non-pilot friend in the airplane, but
Pilot also.
okay. Hopefully you both kind of talk to each other about that, and there was a lot going on. Good job.
Appreciate it.
So I want to get to One Dull Geek's comment, but sometimes I've heard pilots say that they perceived that the controller is mad when multiple people, and there's no way as a pilot that I know that he's hearing somebody else on a different frequency. And I think it's more times than not, the controller is just letting everybody who he's talking with know that multiple people are talking to me every time. He may sound annoyed, and because he probably is,
Okay.
but not specifically at you because you called in. You know what I mean? And I think some people kind of take it that way.
So, One Dull Geek, your question is kind of nuanced. They can hear multiple pilots, but they're not like the squeal sound when you hear multiple pilots on the same frequency. Imagine walking into your kitchen and having a TV in the kitchen, a TV behind you at the living room, and one in the hallway you were in. They don't squeal. You just hear them all. They're all going into the same place. So that's sort of what the frequencies are. There's no priority given. There's the stack of comms that the controller has available doesn't prioritize them. It doesn't try to play them in different. They're just all happening at the same time. Now, if the controller just took 3 handoffs at the same time from 3 different places and 3 different sectors, they're all going to check in at the same time. And we've talked about that too. Some of it has to do with controller frequency management. Do I need to take 16 Lima now? No, I'll wait till I've said goodbye to the Nordo Allegiant, and then I'll go take that handoff because I know 16 Lima is eventually going to check in. He's going to take up ear time. My ears are going to be introduced to his transmission while I know I'm going to hear from these departures or arrivals, whatever they were that he was saying goodbye to. So, no, it's not a squeal. This might be a little bit more detailed than you were looking for, Ben, but the controllers that think the pilots realize they're doing it don't understand the technology in front of them. The pilots don't know that they can't hear the other frequency. You're on frequency A, and the other pilot that was on frequency B. The controller doesn't have they can look, but it's almost impossible to tell who's calling on what frequency. So if they sound frustrated, there's a possibility they thought you were on the same frequency stepping on each other, but the reality is it's not the pilot's fault. It's the way that the frequencies are presented and managed, and you kind of got to get over the whole mood swing thing.
Well, and that's kind of my point is that as pilots, there's going to be interactions with controllers where they're going to sound like they're less than pleased, and you just got to have thick skin. It's not your fault. It's just the situation that you're in, and you need to move on. Another example of that, and I still hear this from time to time, but I think it's probably more required phraseology. But there are times when you're on flight following and you're at your prescribed altitude and you're ready to descend. You let them know, hey, I'm descending, and the response is VFR altitude, your discretion.
Okay.
And sometimes you get VFR flight following, and they say advise of any altitude changes.
I like that technique.
So, but my point is that I've talked to other people, and I've kind of understand where they're coming from. I feel like when I tell them, hey, we're going to descend down to 4,500 feet, and the response is VFR altitude, your discretion, is why are you bothering me with this?
Oh yeah. You're damned if you do, and you're damned if you don't.
That's kind of where I'm leading to, and I just think that they're letting us know that's cool, but I don't know. I'd like to get your perspective on that.
And that comes with dynamics of the airspace. Is that they may say they have a couple choices when you tell them that. When I was a controller, my technique, if I needed you to stay where you were at to preclude you from telling me later on you're descending, I would say maintain. And when you pass the point of conflict, i.e. you've crossed the departures, I don't have any problem with you descending or climbing. Altitude, your discretion. I like to take as a controller, I like to make that known. I'm controlling, I'm giving you some parameters here. When I'm done telling you what I need you to do, you can do what you want. Now, if that wasn't said initially, advise prior to any altitude changes, or they didn't assign you one, and you descend or climb and they give you that kind of tone of, I don't care. That's going to happen. You cannot make every controller react the same way to that. And you find out the first time. You may only do a climb or descent one time in their airspace. You only get it one time. You don't get to redeem yourself. You move on. Guess what? The controller forgot all about it. They do not care. They're done. They've moved on, and you need to do the same thing. And like you said before, you got to have thick skin. But I don't want to go without saying this. Don't be afraid to let them know. You remember, you got into the back and forth with ATC, or it's a two-way street. They can tell you what to do now, which I think is a good thing. They can help you navigate areas that are complex, that you don't know what is going to kill you and what is safe and what's not good. They can tell you what to do, but you can also tell them what you're doing. That's, I think, part of the two-way street. Don't be afraid to say it. Even if you got attitude back from, a center controller who doesn't understand,
right,
you're trying to be nice. Right. Just keep doing it.
Well, we have center controllers, right? So
we love giving them a hard time.
There's two things that I want to emphasize that were in that video that are so great to kind of learn from, and we've already talked about them. But the first is we talked about the Allegiant pilot being Nordo. He was on another frequency, but obviously he missed that first call out to him, and it's a great example of how much time that takes up on a busy frequency, right? Because you're waiting, you've got to wait long enough to see if he replies, and then you've got to do the call again. And I've noticed that when a frequency is really busy, and it just that just kills it.
Yeah, one thing I want to throw in real quick on that, Ted, before you get to your next thing is what I'm doing in that scenario. If I know that I can't hear the other guy, I'm actually imagining what they would be saying back to the controller and about how long that would take, and then just giving it a second. And when I heard him, I was waiting and waiting, imagining what the readback would be or whatever. And then when he called the same plane again, I just thought, well, this might be going on for a while. I'm just going to, and that's the information that the controller wants. So I'm just going to hang out.
Right. That was my second point, which is the timing, which is once you listen long enough, you realize what the response is going to be. And when you're just checking in and you're given the barometer setting, you know that they're reading it back and saying Allegiant 1, 2, 3, 4, and they're done. And you don't even have to hear them to know that's what it is, right? And if you're in a hurry, if you need, you're not just on a long cross country and you want something, how long it takes where you can pop onto the frequency. That's that like Pilot Pro move thing, right? Of playing that back and knowing what that's going to be. And I've noticed the more you do that, the more you notice the calls that deviate from that, and which is always kind of fun.
Yeah, the other I picked up on that practice again from opposing bases is that
me too.
When I hear the PTAC and he's on a different frequency, I know, which I usually struggle with very much, but I know it helps me with the timing of my next transmission. And again, if you're a 50-hour, 100-hour pilot, this is not something that's just going to get into your head by osmosis. You've got to subject yourself. And I did listen to a lot of live ATC, and I would find Charlie airspace because you would get the PTACs, you would get the landing clearances. There's a lot, that you can get from general aviation in a busy airspace, as opposed to listening to the Grits Bravo or the Atlanta Bravo. It's the same thing over and over again. It's really hard to pick up on something new.
Yeah, and I thought of that a few minutes ago, Ben. I wanted to focus on that for a second. For those that do want to listen online and pick a random Bravo airport, that probably isn't the best idea for a place to learn on what type of interactions a VFR, IFR general aviation airplane is going to have below 8,000 feet. Find a Delta or a Charlie with good comms online, and listen to ground, listen to clearance, listen to the tower. You may not be able to hear all the pilot transmissions depending on where their receiver is for the site that's recording it, but you can glean a lot from. I agree with you, Charlie's. There's more variety, I think, for GA, but if you just tune in to JFK, you're going to hear the same 20 things the whole hour. That's all they're going to do. There's going to be no variety at all. You're not going to hear a student mess up and see how that gets navigated. You're not going to hear any of that stuff. So
Yep.
try to find a Charlie or a Delta. You're going to get more.
Yeah, I listen to Chattanooga and Birmingham a lot, and I do listen to Greensboro when it's up and running. And just as a quick clarification, I mentioned that the acronym PTAC that's given on an IFR instrument approach. It stands for position, turn, altitude, and clearance. How'd I do?
Very good. And it's required in that order. It sounds a little bit different depending on where you go. It sounds really different in my home airport right now. The controllers are a little bit loose with that, but in instrument training, that's enough to sink your battleship. It's tough to read that back. It's tough to understand what's happening. That comes with time, but you mentioned it. If it's early in the day and they're combined frequencies, the controller just read 5 miles from Brant, turn right heading 200, maintain 3,000 still steps and localize the cloud ILS 23 left. It took them a second to say that. It's going to take, even if it's not perfect, it's going to take about that time or more for the drooling instrument pilot to read that back. And it's not your time to key up and say, we're 45 miles away at 4,500 feet looking for flight following. Just wait a second, chill out.
I still I do pretty well with PTACs now, but I still get a lot of anxiety when I know it's coming up. And I feel like if I have time in my flight to prepare for it, I do, because it's so, I've embarrassed myself. I told Atlanta TRACON, I was just like marbles in my mouth, and I just said 3,000 turn to this heading, and it's this and that, and you know what I'm trying. I basically said to him, I literally said to him, you know what I'm trying to say, and he laughed, and it was pretty funny. But speaking of flight following, Brian, you had a question.
Oh yes, so many moons ago, you guys laid out what you prescribed as being the ideal flight following call. And now I understand that this can vary a little bit based on experiences. Ben and I were
there it is.
Oh yeah, like so Ben and I were I was flying out of where were we? Blairsville. Yeah, we were flying out of Blairsville. So I took off, and then he took off behind me, and I get on with the center controller or whoever it was.
It was a center controller, and that's an important distinction.
Yes,
yeah, their computer's a little bit different, and they may like it in a different order than what.
We'll listen to the story.
Well, if I'm so used to being in busy kind of airspace around Nashville, if I have your ear as a controller, maybe this is a good thing and it's not a good thing. I will give you the beans right away, because I've got you. And I mean, there's times in Nashville where I want to get into the airspace. I've taken people up. Ted, we flew around with Cheryl. We flew around west of town for 30 minutes, just waiting for any available microsecond of radio openness to ask to be able to come in the airspace for more than a half an hour, and never got the opportunity and came back and landed. Right. So it can be like that. So I'm conditioned, unfortunately, just to start unloading, and I get on, I'm coming out of mountain town, Blairsville, Georgia, getting on with the center controller and I say VFR requests. And then I hit him with all the beans and he, what did he say, Ben? It was like,
he said, I just need your plane type and your destination.
buddy.
And he said, buddy.
Yeah. He's like, yeah. It's kind of like, I don't know, like I said something inappropriate to his girlfriend or something. It was really strange. He was really mad. So I realized that was a bit of a clarifying moment that yes, you gotta know where you are and who you're talking to. And that's a nuanced thing, but Ben did the right thing. And even with your experience, Ben, you said, well, I'm just going to skip right past that. I just heard him grill Brian. So I'm going to.
So what happened was he got him in the system. And as soon as he got him in the system, he handed him off to, I think it was Chattanooga Approach. And I'm listening to all this because I'm right next to him, and I'm like, "Yep, we're just going straight to Chattanooga.
Yep,
I'm
not even going to bother."
It's kind of like when you see one of your friends get in trouble when you're staying overnight at their house or something. You know what I mean? You're just like, "Well, we're not playing basketball anymore."
Yeah, I this answer is a little bit more complicated than I think some people. They want a simple canned answer for every situation when you introduce yourself and say what you want, and it isn't that simple. It's different with a center controller. It's different with a Charlie that's busy at Nashville. They should be a Bravo. There, I said it.
Oh yeah.
Um,
Oh yeah.
it's different than a Delta control that you're checking in, and that's what they're waiting to hear is November 123 10 North Delta full stop. That's all they want to hear. They're not tagging you up. They're not giving you a code. They're going to tell you how to enter the pattern. You call Charlie controller. You're 20 miles from the main airport, and you want flight following. I still endorse this. I think AG does as well. I'm perfectly fine with you doing a call, introduction, November 123, and wait for them to call you back. That means they've given you the time you need. And then when you speak back up, you're in the chat, you wrote the ideal call. You've given the controller a chance to call you back. They're ready to type. November 123, Blairsville, flight following, wherever. I don't know where you were going. Chattanooga, Cherokee, 3500, unkey. They type it in that order. They type your call sign, a space bar. It's at the bottom of that awesome keyboard. They type in a 3-letter identifier, a VOR of where you are, a character in between, where you're going, space again, aircraft type, which is 4 letters on their keyboard, space again, and then three number altitude, 035, 045. And it's in that order. When they hit enter, it's going to generate a strip. It's going to give them a code to read to you. And you should get some compliment. At least 1 out of 10 should say, that was a great request. You gave it to me in the order that I have to type this in. What happens a lot of the times, though, is, hey, November 123, we're a Skyhawk at 3,500 feet. We want to go to Chattanooga. We're over Blairsville. Well, it's totally backwards.
Yeah.
And now I have to remember that, which seems like an eternity for a controller to type.
Yeah.
So now we're piecing the puzzle back together backwards. It's actually pretty difficult. We can't clear things, and it's not like a normal interface. We're talking basic DOS input here.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the thing too is that so what I've been doing that may be not ideal is I'll refer to myself as Cherokee and my call sign and all that, but I'll actually finish the call with PA28 because it seems like they always forget. And I think I even heard you say once, it's like by the time I'm really dialed into what you're saying, I very well might have missed what you said you were. And so I don't know. So sometimes I finish up with that. And so it's sort of like beginning with type in a looser way and then finishing with specific type. Is that goofy?
That's probably not going to mess them up if you gave it to them in the order in between, but they've probably already passed that part of the script they're typing of the type, or they're stalled there for a second. And then if you said it at the end, it's like, I was guilty of it. I needed it to be in the right order or I was going to struggle. I would write it down if you were out of order so I could go back and type it off my notes. But
yeah. Well, what makes me crazy is just when you hear the cherry picking conversations start. And sometimes I feel like controllers actually create that problem for themselves.
They do.
Where they'll come back and be like, well, what is your destination? As opposed to just saying, what is your destination type? Right. So then it becomes like a piece by piece thing. And I start to feel like an angry controller because I'm listening. Like this could have been done already. But it's hard. It's hard.
There's other things going on in the background too. They may be waiting to give, Ben a PTAC.
Yeah.
They found, a 30-second window where they have an opportunity to ask you all this stuff. And so the clock is ticking in their brain. They may have a controller checking in because they had to check in. So they blocked another frequency. You didn't hear that. You'll never hear that frequency. So you got to give them the breathing room. But that's why I completely endorse introducing yourself and letting them call you back, because when they make that call back to you, they should be ready to comprehend and digest what you're about to say.
So that was the other thing that I wanted to touch on, is because there seems to be a minor debate on whether to do the cold call or whether to go in with the full Monty. And again, it's reading the room. If I'm in South Georgia and there's some frequencies on Atlanta Tracon or Jack's Center, it's going to be quiet. I'm going to go in full bore. Here's what I want. Here's what I'm going to do. But especially if I'm in Atlanta's, the Tracon or Center's airspace, I'm going to do the cold call. They may get slightly annoyed, but it's going to be less than if I gave them everything I
Yep.
needed when they were trying to do it. So I'm trying to pick the lesser of two evils.
Yeah,
That's a good point.
if they don't want to talk to you on the cold call and they're busy doing other stuff, they can also ignore you too.
Right.
Or write down your call sign or start typing it, because we can type the call sign in first and have it sitting there in the scratch pad. And then I'll call you back when I have time to get all that stuff. So that's probably a good segue, I think, to another lesson for the pilots out there. It is almost 100% likely that if they weren't talking at the same time, you didn't hear them going crazy, that they heard your call sign. There's an uncomfortable weight on your part because you're like, oh my God, did they hear me? When do I call again? They don't want to talk to me. I'm just a Cherokee. You have to be patient. Sometimes they'll come back to you and say, hey, I just ignored somebody. What was that? I got the last three of the call sign. That patience to wait for that goes a million miles with the controller. Thank you. They're thanking you by coming back to you. Hey, thank you for not keying in 10 more times to tell me what you wanted. You heard me busy. I appreciate that. Now I have time. And they could honestly forget about you too. So if you hear a big lull afterwards and you're confident that there's time, key up again and act like it's the first call. Don't give them the tone like this is my second or third call. That is not going to help you.
I want to give some defense of do you cold call or do you give the full thing? No matter what you do, you're going to be wrong. There's probably a good argument for making the cold call as being the nicer of the two, but whatever. It seems like there's no way to know. Reading the room, you can kind of get an idea of that depending how busy it is. The other thing is, man, if you're a newer pilot, don't worry about the order of the information you're giving. If you can manage to get it all out in less than a minute and a half in any order, you're doing good. You forget one thing, they're going to come back and ask you. And I think some of that is the fears, right? Of like, I'm going to get it wrong. I didn't give it exactly in the order. I said in the middle of it.
Oh yeah. And don't ever let that be an inhibitor to just get flight following. Be on flight following. Do it all the time. Have it in your minimums. I have it in my minimums for if I'm flying more than I think it's 15 miles. I'm on flight following all the time, and that will help you become a much better pilot, much faster. And don't be. And I know that people that train, especially in maybe more rural areas, it's a very different dynamic and it seems more daunting, or it feels like you're kind of under some authoritarian rule that you're being, sort of oppressed. It's not that. It's actually a massively beneficial thing. And I can't tell you how many times I've had planes come very close to me that I'm so glad I kind of had an idea of what was happening, because I don't know. There's just a million things where I would have put myself in a really bad position, especially early on, had I not had them guiding me essentially and putting me in the right place.
Why don't we get to the second clip and we'll hammer that one around.
All right.
Let me play. This is flight following from Brian.
Number 5116 Lima VFR request.
That's November 5116 Lima.
Affirmative, Cherokee, November 5116 Lima, just off of Upper Cumberland, Sierra Romeo Bravo, like flight following to Romeo Hotel Papa, 3,300 climbing, 7,500 PA28.
November 5116 Lima, squawk 1607.
1607, 16 Lima.
November 5116 Lima, radar contact 4 miles east of the Sparta Airport, Sparta altimeter 3004, maintain VFR, and you said you're going to Romeo Papa Hotel?
04, position altitude checks, affirmative, Romeo Hotel Papa, 16 Lima.
And verify your destination again for me.
Romeo Hotel Papa, destination for 16 Lima.
Roger, Romeo Hotel Papa, put it in backwards, maintain VFR.
VFR, 16 Lima.
What was the squawk again in that? Because there's actually some more to that too that's happening that might be a little more complicated. But
was it a local code?
It was probably a local code. I think it started with a 0. My memory may have lapsed there, but I feel like it was a local code, which means he probably couldn't hand you off. He'll have to go do something in the keyboard on his end later, and he may have given you a different code in a few minutes, depending on if you had to go to another facility. If you were in-house and you were going to stay in that facility, he wouldn't have to do that. So, the system was kicking back. He was typing in an airport that probably didn't exist, so it was saying fix. and he's
Yeah.
ready to kill the keyboard. So that's why he asked you 3 times. But, I think the kind of a takeaway from that is the order was a little bit different.
Yep.
For that controller, it wasn't as important because he missed the important pieces. For a Tracon controller, it wouldn't have generated that code. If he had asked for all that and they tried to type in half of it, it won't do it without it being typed into a reasonable place. So it has to be an actual airport. But it worked. The communication worked. You were patient again, despite there being just a little bit of back and forth that you thought was extra, but it wasn't anything you did. I think it was just a mistype.
Yeah, and the other thing about that particular call that I thought was interesting is that, again, I'm sort of embattled about when to just sort of give him the beans about all of the request. And so when I asked for a request and then he came back with a question, just trying to make sure he had my tail number right, instead of me saying affirmative 5116 Lima and then unkeying and then waiting for him.
I don't
feel
think you
like
did anything wrong by doing that. You gave him the beans. I think you were fine doing that. It was,
but
he
those are
just
the
had it in
subtle
his head that
pieces.
you were going to a different airport, and he typed it in that way, and
Yeah.
that was the reason for. But you didn't. Again, you don't have to be perfect. He engaged in a conversation with you. You have every right to start giving them all the things because it's proper etiquette. Hey, he called on me. I'm gonna give him everything now. You don't have to do the back and forth. We refer to those on the show as a dentist appointment. Don't make me pull teeth. The worst thing you could do is give me each of that. Hey, we're at Cherokee. Cool. Where do you want to go? Where do you want to go? Oh, we want to go here. Okay.
Yeah.
What else? Now that takes time, and you're going to probably get the controller a little bit annoyed. But
what'd you pay for your Cherokee?
Hey,
I want to hit another listener of your podcast, RH. He's been a contributor, and he's a big friend of our shows, and he was also my CFI for my commercial. Nathan Ballard asked, for a new pilot, how much does tone and just being courteous to the controller matter to the quality of the ATC service they will get in return?
I think it goes a long way. And if you sound confident, even, fake it till you make it. If you sound like you know what you're doing and you speak up with good voice quality and it's not mumbled, there's some confidence behind what you're saying, it does go a long way. And it does depend on the audience. If you check in with Atlanta Tracon and you sound like it might be your third or fourth, maybe fifth flight, it's probably going to, they know they're going to have to dedicate more time to you and bandwidth that they may not have. And that's going to get you off to a wrong start with that controller. But
And spacing. Yeah.
Yeah. So, be confident. It comes with time, but it does go a long way. And you said being nice, you don't have to sound like some movie you saw. Try to sound like a professional when you speak up. They're trying to as well. They may not be a perfect phraseology expert all the time, but they're also trying. You're being recorded. You're in an environment with other pilots. Do your best. And being nice doesn't hurt. It doesn't hurt at all. And it should make the controller a little more calm and a little more reluctant to be a jerk if they're in a bad mood. Just, they have to read the room too.
Yeah.
And
I want to
there's
give a quick shout out. Luke's Landing, a friend of Brian's, and I do like his videos.
He's the guy in the plane with those clips.
He's the guy in the plane, the clips you just saw.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm loving the conversation in the chat about the trucks and the 182 because I drive an F-150 and I fly a 182. So I'm agreeing with everything they're saying. Try not to be too distracted. Another one of our friends of the show was at our fly-in, Biff Benson. So in that scenario, if Brian wanted to deviate a mile or so off course to sightsee something briefly, should he give advance notice or not, given he was told to maintain VFR? Always unsure on that one.
If you're VFR and a mile, it may seem like a long way for you, but for a controller, unless you turn 90 degrees left or right, they're probably not even going to notice. And we're not drawing a line and sticking you to a magenta line on the scope. So a mile is nothing, 5 or 10 miles. Hey, we're going to go over here and sightsee a little bit. You may see us go off course. You can give them a heads up. They'll probably register as that as thanks. And now there might be a traffic situation they point out. It could change the dynamic of what's happening at the time. So don't be afraid to say it. But a mile A mile's not that far. They wouldn't even notice.
So I have one more. I haven't told either of you this story, or RH as well. I know we're kind of getting short on time, but speaking of that, I was probably 80 hours into my flight journey, and I had a lot of interactions with Atlanta TradeCon. I'd go get a clearance into the Bravo and go over the top a lot, and I was coming back home from Albany, Georgia, back up to McCollum, which took me right over my hometown of Thomaston. And I knew my dad was playing golf. And so I was on flight following, and I'm VFR. Man, I'll go wherever I want to. I'll just go to whatever altitude I want. And I started to descend to do a low pass. I was 800 feet above the ground, 1,000 feet, and it was a golf course, wasn't that crowded. And just to do a wing wag over them as they were playing golf, because it's a small town. They were the only ones on the course. And I get back up, and I'm hearing, 1491, where are you? 14, are you with me? Are you with me?
Oh,
And
man.
he thought I went down. And rightfully so, because I dropped off of his radar.
Yeah.
And he
Yeah.
goes, I know you aren't required to, you're VFR, but you got to tell me what's going on.
Yep.
I mean, we had a laugh about it, but to that point, that kind of highlights exactly why you do what you do, because they don't know if you don't tell them.
Yep. Don't be afraid to speak, give them details of what's happening, especially if you're going to add fixes. I won't go into, I know we're short on time. If you're adding fixes to your flight plan and it's obvious that you're not going direct to this place that is pretty close and you want to go to a VOR or go over a house, speak up. Hey, we're going to zigzag a little bit on the way. Yeah, I know that's not proper phraseology, but they'll get it. That's fine.
Just say I'm requesting a Trent Palmer.
It might not go over so well.
A couple of things. Biff was asking about that, and Brian, you were flying basically off in Centerland, right, middle of nowhere, roughly, and deviating there is a lot different than where Biff is, where he's under a triple Bravo, and or under a shelf of it, and and so again, that comes back to the whole idea of reading the room, right? Which is, man, if there's traffic around you, if you're in a more controlled area like that, much more likely to need to say something or bother them whether they want it or not. And where, out in the middle of nowhere, who cares?
It's kind of like in certain towns, if you just want to skateboard down the wrong lane on Main Street, it's really not that big of a deal. And then in a busier city, if you skateboard down the wrong lane on Main Street, you're probably going to get hit and or ticketed. So it really is based on your context and your surroundings. But ultimately, all I try to do is I listen to opposing bases, and then I just try to act like I just say, what would Ben do? And then I just do what Ben would do.
And you still have your certificate. That's pretty incredible. That's RH, man, we really appreciate you joining us tonight. And honestly, for all the support you've given us through your podcast, it really does mean a lot to us.
Yeah.
And let's plug it. You're going to be up at Oshkosh, right?
Oshkosh on July 27th. We'll be there for a live show at 10 a.m. at AOPA. Come check it out. And if you give me one more, do I have a minute? Can I say something to your
absolutely
audience? I think you guys picked an awesome hobby, and maybe you didn't realize what you're getting into until your third or fourth flight, but you're sticking to it. And being a pilot's great. You're going to feel like you're learning forever. Each one of these new airports, I feel like I'm a private pilot again. That never stops. So if you're waiting for that flight where you feel like the pro, keep waiting. Just keep learning. Every time you go up, try to make each flight better. Try to make every transmission better. Impress your flight instructor, but learn something. And, good on you for tackling this in midlife. So, and thank you again, guys, for having me.
And speak of Trent Palmer, who is a fantastic pilot, there's an example of a great pilot who never goes into controlled airspace. He has a recent video where he was doing something weird, which is landing inside the Charlie on a non-airport surface. But he's not comfortable on the radio. And it's a good reminder that no matter who you are, there's different skills, and that's okay. So, yeah.
Very good. Well, I want to give another shout out for those that are members of our Patreon. We do put on bonus stuff, and we just did a debrief with one of our listeners. Wheel in the Sky is his handle. He just passed his commercial, and we listed that.
Yeah.
And then also, just you get a lot of access to the Discord. Is probably one of the better things about our community. Despite us, there's a lot of support on there. So
In spite of us.
in spite of us, that's exactly right. Listen, we appreciate everybody for listening. It's been a great conversation. Join us on Patreon. Send us a PayPal drop. You can contact us at midlifepilotpodcast.com. Send us some feedback. We'd love to hear from you. For that, gentlemen, anything else for the good of the order?
You guys are crushing it. You guys are really doing a great job. I like what you're doing, and I think the conversation needs to keep going. Don't worry about the show topics. They're going to come naturally. You guys are hitting all the points people need to talk about, and they want to hear. They just want to hear you guys talk and tell your stories. That's all it comes down to. And you've got a good audience that you're building. So congrats on that.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
so until next week,
it's
a wrap for episode 84 of the Midlife Pilot Podcast. We'll look forward to hanging with you guys next week. See you.